I'm meteorologist Peter Chan. Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show on this Sunday, February 12th, 2023. We try to do this each evening through a unique partnership with Alaska Public Media. And if you'd like additional weather information on top of what I provide, you can go to weather.gov. That is the National Weather Service's online presence. It'll bring you to a point-and-click map of the continental U.S. with Alaska and Hawaii to the lower left, and it'll bring up a forecast for any location in the country, along with any relevant watches, warnings, or advisories. There's all sorts of other information to look up as well. Looking at the map this Sunday afternoon, lower 48, notice there are various winter weather advisories, watches, and warnings, especially along and west of the Rockies, including some wind advisories and high wind warnings. There are going to be a couple of different weather systems moving across the western half of the CONUS that will eventually be moving through the eastern portion of the country as we go through this week. So a rather active weather pattern will continue there. And the pattern will be a little more active and progressive, especially across the southern half of Alaska, as the flow aloft is going to be more of a west-southwest to east-northeast. That's going to take weather systems through the lower Bering, North Pacific, across areas of the Gulf and down in through the lower interface there of the North Pacific. But nevertheless, there is going to be a stronger low impacting the Aleutians now into Monday, and eventually spread some wind and snow up there through the Pribilof Islands, where there will be blizzard conditions developing on Monday. There are still a few mainland advisories in effect from the northwest coast to parts of the interior, but those are not especially impactful compared to what we've seen in the recent past. And then overall temperatures are expected to average near or a bit below normal across much of the state, with above normal precipitation setting up here as we get past mid-month, up through the central interior, up through especially the middle upper Yukon Valley. Looking at a few of the FAA webcams this Sunday afternoon, new exit there along the far north, especially areas along the Arctic coast, are seeing generally clear skies, but cold temperatures, 24 below the current reading there for the early mid-afternoon. Further west, some areas are seeing some blowing snow. Now, as we go south to St. Paul, St. George area, some light snow, but the main event coming tomorrow into Monday night will bring blizzard conditions with strong storm force gust, along with maybe 3 to 6 inches of snowfall. So that's why a blizzard warning has been issued for that time frame there. Blizzard warning that has been in effect this afternoon for Soldotna really hasn't developed. We have the winds in place, but not the falling snow. And at least of early afternoon, there were some broken cloud cover, so that warning may be canceled early. It was supposed to go out till midnight, and then Talkeetna getting a little light snow and fog, 21 degrees early this Sunday afternoon. So here are the advisories for the areas of the mainland, including the northwest coast for some blowing snow, and that'll be in effect through at least Monday morning. The advisory here in the west central interior that includes Galena, Ruby, Caltag, that's going to expire at 9 p.m. this Sunday evening. Still a little patchy light snow and blowing snow, but not especially that impactful. And then this area here along the east central Alaska range, there could be some gusty winds to 40 miles an hour, especially through Isabel Pass, that could reduce visibilities tonight into Monday morning, perhaps as low as a quarter mile. Now, back out across South Center, here's that blizzard warning for the western Kenai that's supposed to be in effect till midnight. That will probably be canceled early just because we haven't developed the falling snow there, though it has been a breezy Sunday afternoon. Further west, blizzard warning in effect for St. Paul, St. George, Monday morning through mid-morning Tuesday. Some rather strong winds are going to set up with a frontal band that lifts just south of their location, but they'll be in a prime spot for strong winds and some heavier snowfall. And then back toward Adak on the backside of this low coming out of the North Pacific. Winter storm warning now through Monday morning, where there'll be accumulating snow, blowing, drifting snow, could even be near blizzard conditions at times there overnight tonight. And then an important thing I want to pass along, you'll hear more about this coming up. New marine zones are coming out for Alaska effective March 8th. The most important thing is this is going to provide you with more specific marine weather information that better represents a given location. It'll improve the accuracy of forecast watches, warnings, and advisories. The nearshore marine forecast will be added, and it's a zone that'll cover the coastline out to 15 nautical miles all around the coastal areas of Alaska, with the coastal zones extending from 15 nautical miles out upwards to 100 nautical miles in some cases. And there'll also be some marine zones that have been broken up made into smaller zones that have been added in the Gulf of Alaska, Prince William Sound, the Aleutians, and eastern Bering Sea to just give you a little more accurate information for those areas instead of one gigantic zone. Most marine zones, though, their forecast zone names and numbers will be changing, so you'll need to be aware of that and pay attention so that you're getting your forecast information correctly for a given location. But here's the old system with the coastal zone and then the offshore zones. We will now be taking those coastal zones and in some cases breaking them up into smaller zones and then adding in yellow that 15 nautical mile near shore marine forecast zone that should help improve the forecast, be more representative for conditions there right along the immediate coast. So looking at the satellite imagery, we have one low here in the northeastern Gulf bringing showers and mix of showers there out through the Panhandle. Most importantly, though, is this shield, this bright cloud tops here from the frontal system and low that's currently south of the central Aleutians. This is the frontal system will be lifting and rotating to the north and northeast and bring in the blizzard conditions to St. Paul during the day on Monday, especially Monday afternoon and Monday night. AKwx will be getting in on those heavier snows and strong winds and blowing and drifting snow tonight. And as that system works its way east, it will gradually weaken. Here's the low this afternoon. In the northeastern Gulf, a weak low just outside of Kotzebue Sound in the lower portion of the Chukchi Sea, another weak low out toward St. Paul. But here is the strong low that's approaching and passing. It'll pass just south of the Aleutian chain, and with it, some nasty winter weather on the backside of it there, especially there toward AKwx for now through early on Monday morning. And then as we go into Monday afternoon, that front's going to lift a little further north, and that's what's going to bring and really tighten the wind gradient there along the Pribilof Islands where the blizzard conditions will be going on there. And then by Tuesday afternoon, secondary low kind of weak develops out through the far north Pacific up into the lower Gulf, and then the main low that was responsible for passing south of the Aleutian chain will be there, but not as strong as it weakens. Low temperatures overnight tonight, generally near or slightly below freezing Panhandle, single digits even up through south central. Temperatures stay cold western Kenai up through the Anchorage Bowl and up through Talkeetna, only in the teens on Monday, maybe a little above freezing across areas of the central southern Panhandle. And then Tuesday morning lows will be sub-zero, say Copper River Basin, Talkeetna, especially west of the Alaska Range. And then temperatures Tuesday afternoon may just come up a few degrees into the mid, perhaps upper 30s there in the outer southern parts of the Panhandle, and getting back up into the 20s, creeping upward into the Anchorage Bowl, 38 at Kodiak. Coldest temperatures in the state will remain like last week across the Arctic coast, North Slope. Lows everywhere up that way below zero. Maybe not quite as cold as the past couple of weeks, but still cold. The cold air will hold there with daytime highs in the 20s to near 30 below there in the far north. Single digits below zero along and just south of the Yukon River. Tuesday morning lows will be cold. Some areas 20 below, even back through the Seward Peninsula, including Nome on up toward Shishmaref, and then areas further east below zero up through the Yukon River. And again, daytime highs getting back up a bit above zero, generally south of the Yukon River by Tuesday afternoon, including Fairbanks, Nenana on up toward the Alaska Range. And temperatures for the southwest below zero tonight, a little below freezing, even out in through the eastern central Aleutians, but trying to bump back up to around 40 at Nikolsky with that frontal zone rotating up in their direction for Monday afternoon. And then Tuesday morning lows, again, well below zero, coming up through the Yukon and Kuskokwim River basins. And daytime highs by Tuesday afternoon, still single digits, a bit above or below zero there across the southwest interior, and then back up mid-30s to near 40 degrees from the Alaska Peninsula, extending southwestward toward the eastern half of the Aleutians. So the temperature outlook, the 6 to 10-day temperature outlook, February 18th through the 22nd. This is now past mid-month. We're expecting temperatures to average near or a bit below normal across much of the state, including areas of the southeast in through the Panhandle, and the greatest likelihood of below normal temperatures continuing here over areas of the northwest, centered on Nome up through Kotzebue. And precipitation in the pattern we're in, when you have that progressive southwest to west and then working its way east, northeast, could bring rounds of moisture up through the Yukon River, especially north of the Alaska Range. So within this area, there could be precipitation average above normal across areas of the middle and especially upper Yukon Valley here as we get past the middle portion of the month.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, let's take a look now at your aviation weather. If you have a flight planned either on Monday or Tuesday, a couple of the main weather features will be a weakening area of low pressure out over the northwestern Gulf with a trough extending eastward. Some precipitation along this feature in areas of IFR to start Monday morning from especially the intercoastal mountains, the Panhandle, back up into the southeast interior and even along and just north of the central Alaska Range. Broad area of IFR, though, out across the eastern central Aleutians, associated with a stronger low that'll be passing just south of that area, and that low has strong winds around it in its circulation that'll create areas of moderate and severe turbulence. By Monday afternoon, IFR conditions relax across the Gulf and Panhandle. There is an area up in the west central, especially up across Kotzebue Sound, lower Chukchi, but here is a broad area of IFR conditions associated with that low in the front and precipitation that's working its way east-northeastward. The main low will pass south of the Alaska Peninsula as we get into Tuesday. A secondary low will try to develop just off to the south of there, South Kodiak Island, as the result of the front pushing further eastward across the peninsula and up into the far south-southwest interior. Otherwise, we see IFR conditions increasing again by Tuesday afternoon across much of the Gulf in through the western, northern two-thirds of the Panhandle, southeast interior, Copper River Basin along south of the Alaska Range across much of the Alaska Peninsula and a good chunk of Kodiak Island. Also areas of IFR continue in through the central Bering, with the next area of low pressure affecting the far western half of the Aleutians later on Tuesday. So past conditions, Anaktuvik Pass as well as Adigan passes will see VFR conditions in the morning giving way to MVFR late afternoon, evening hours. And then further south and west, Lake Clark and Merrill, generally MVFR conditions giving way to VFR. Rainy Pass, also MVFR early in the day Monday, giving way to VFR conditions. Windy Pass will see some IFR conditions lingering across the north side of it. Further south, giving MVFR giving way to VFR. And then Isabel Pass, similarly, we'll see IFR conditions along and north of the north entrance Monday morning, but becoming MVFR overall with VFR conditions developing further south of the south entrance. Mentasta Pass should see IFR conditions early Monday giving way to VFR conditions. Same thing at Tanita Pass. And then also down there toward the coast, Portage Pass, IFR conditions becoming VFR. And then finally in the far northern Panhandle, look at IFR conditions to start off Monday morning at both Chilkoot and White becoming MVFR. Freezing levels, the surface freezing line runs across the lower Bering Sea, north of the central Aleutians, across the eastern Aleutians, tip of the Alaska Peninsula, and then out well east of Kodiak Island up through the central Gulf along the northeastern Gulf Coast in through the inner channels there of the Panhandle. Freezing levels aloft 2,000 feet there. You have to get way down toward Vancouver Island and well south of the central Aleutians. And then the greatest threat for icing along a trough that'll have precipitation there in areas of the Gulf Coast, eastern Gulf Coast, above 4,000 feet into parts of the northern Panhandle. And then back here associated with that stronger low, the circulation around it, a front extending eastward ahead of it, generally above 1,000 feet toward the Pribilof Islands, above 2,000 feet. There could be some moderate icing. And then further south where precipitation will mainly be rain above 4,000 feet. Strongest upper level jet stream winds at 30,000 feet. We have an anticyclonic jet core associated with this ridge, upwards to 175 knots from the northwest, just west of Haida Gwaii. And then there's another jet core coming in from the west there that's off of the southwest of the western Aleutians. 700 millibars, a couple of low circulations, one up in the far northern Bering Sea, the most prominent one just south of the central Aleutians. And then at 3,000 feet, we see this strong low pressure passing just south of the central Aleutians, and the belt of winds anywhere from 45 to 60, even locally 70 knots, that will be associated with the frontal band and circulation along the backside of this area of low pressure. It's going to create rather widespread, severe turbulence areas, surface to 3,000 feet north of the central and eastern Aleutians, as well as south. You give that counterclockwise circulation and the frontal band that arcs out ahead of it. That feature will be working its way eastward during the day on Monday. It's also accompanied by precipitation. Areas out here that are snow, likely out over the ocean there, blizzard conditions, but nothing really impacting the inland. And we'll expect moderate turbulence in areas of the northwest up toward Point Lay, and then also along areas of the Panhandle.
Hello again, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with the National Weather Service with another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. And joining me today are not just one, but two people, both with the last name Stevens, which is even more fun, but no relation. We have Eric Stevens from GINA and George Stevens, who is a mechanical engineering student from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Did I get that right?
Yep.
Awesome. And today you guys brought a really cool toy, or I should say tool, with you. It's a sandbox, but why are you guys working on a sandbox?
Well, it's part of our senior design project, and we were approached by EPSCoR to build this for them. Mm-hmm. They had a proof of concept that they developed about a year ago, I think, and they wanted a more robust version that they could pack onto a plane and take places, and it's a handy learning tool for kids and adults.
So you're a mechanical engineering student. You've built a traveling sandbox for the experimental program to stimulate competitive research, EPSCoR, and GINA's facilitated this. But why do we need a traveling sandbox?
Well, the prototype was such a big hit that they decided they wanted another one, actually two, that they could that would be easier to travel with. You know. Possibly marketable even. Okay, so this is a traveling sandbox that's got a lot of bits and pieces and a computer hooked up to it. What is the computer doing with the sand? The computer actually uses a Kinect sensor to read the topography of the sand or the shape of the sand, and then the computer translates that into information which it projects using a projector onto the sand, showing topographical lines and which is representative of the shape of the sand. Okay, so this is a live mapping tool? Yeah. It's interactive. As you're moving your hands through it, it is actively following and changing the lines to fit what you're doing. That sounds like something I could have in my backyard. Yep. It'd be a lot of fun. So you guys had to change the design a little bit to make this more Alaska-fied, right? Yeah. Okay, how'd you do that? Well, the original was made out of basically lumber and Simpson strong tie type stuff, and we rebuilt it to make it lighter and basically more transportable. We can pack it down to a fairly small size, and it can be loaded onto a plane and flown anywhere in the state. Which you guys did today. And you have plans to take this in other places of Alaska, right? Yep, we're actually going to be headed down to Homer with it later today. Okay, very good. Eric, how does this fit into science learning around Alaska?
Well, you know what? I think it is a tool and it is a toy, and it brings out a smile from an 8-year-old and the smile from a 48-year-old with that inner 8-year-old wanting to get out. The sandbox, it's an interactive learning tool that teaches us how topography in the 3 dimensions is related to, say, a 2-dimensional map. More about that later. Just like George was saying, it's got a Kinect sensor, not just for video games anymore. It can sense out the lay of the land there, feeds that information in the computer. The computer identifies that, sends a signal to a projector to send topographic lines to map over that lumpy ground. So you get a 3-dimensional topo map out of it. And my favorite thing about it, this is the thing that stops people at the trade show. They stop at your booth and don't leave, is that you run your hand through that sandbox and it responds in real time. It remaps the topography as you get to be Mr. Tectonic Plate Drifter there. You can make things how you want. Well, what if we made a really high mountain here and a low valley there, and the lines adjust to what you did? It's a learning tool tool because it shows you that connection between these two-dimensional topo lines and what's really out in Alaska. And Alaska's a place with all kinds of topography. You know, we're from the Great Plains, where topo maps tend to be just like blank pieces of paper, but Alaska is particularly gifted in this regard, and this tool helps us, I think, learn more about our state, really.
Absolutely. And so this is going to enhance STEM learning, the science, technology, engineering, and math in many different locations around Alaska. Then this would be something that kids and teachers can get their hands on.
It sure is. And I mentioned the it's like fly paper at a booth that, or at the Science Potpourri when we had Greg's original version of this sandbox, and that one was made out of scraps of wood, and it was a prototype. But even that one, before it had some of the refinements that George and crew have made for this newer. Upscaled, maybe a 2.0 version of the sandbox. Even that one was so attractive to people. It just demonstrated that this has potential to be a learning tool, an outreach tool, an education tool that now is portable and can go places in Alaska. Of course, there's only one sandbox, can't be everywhere at once, but hopefully it gets out there, gets the word out about EPSCoR and what science is being done here for Alaskans.
All right, that sounds really interesting, and I can't wait to get my hands in the sand and try this out for myself. We're going to demonstrate this here in our next segment of Alaska Weather Facts, but before we go, we want to remind you that EPSCoR, which is a new acronym for me now, but I'm going to remember this because you can follow them on Facebook and Twitter, and I invite you to do that. Alaska EPSCoR is also something that facilitates science learning at the University of Alaska around the state, and that stands for Experimental Program to Stimulate Competitive Research. So check that out, and make sure you tune in tomorrow because we're going to have the next version where we actually get our hands in the sand and check out how this works and demonstrates that topography. So for now, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with this edition of Alaska Weather Facts, and we'll see you again next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and it's now time to look at the sea ice edge before we get into the marine forecast. And extensive ice continues across the far north and in through the Chukchi Sea. There are a few areas, Polinias openings that have occurred along some of the shore-fast ice, but we're not anticipating any really strong winds coming up here the next couple of days. Strongest winds will be down here along the leading ice edge of this ice in the eastern portion of the Bering Sea. There could be a bit of a southward drift coming up here as we go, especially into later Monday and Tuesday, once we get winds turn around more toward the north. In the meantime, though, for the inner channels on Monday, we expect winds to be southwest 20 knots, Petersburg down through Ketchikan, waves running 4 feet as high as 12 feet there at Dixon Entrance. Northwest winds 15 knots, Lynn Canal with 3-foot waves, and then the outer coast, some gale force winds, especially south of Gustavus to 35 knots and waves as high as 25 feet for the offshore coastal waters. And then for Tuesday, winds turn more southeasterly through the inner channels at 15 knots, waves 3 feet, Petersburg on up through Lynn Canal, and further south, perhaps 7-foot waves there at the entrance of Dixon Entrance, and then back out along the outer Gulf coast winds will be south, turning southeasterly, 30 to as high as 40 knots west of Yakutat, with waves generally 12 to 14 feet. For the northwestern Gulf, we're going to see the strongest winds coming out of here at the entrance of Cook Inlet and just northeast of Kodiak to 45-knot westerly winds, waves 14 to as high as 20 feet in the open waters of the Gulf. Northwest winds 25 knots with 6-foot waves in Prince William Sound, and north winds up on the north end of Cook Inlet with waves there a couple of feet. For Tuesday, we do expect winds out over the Gulf open waters, 35 to 40 knots, a bit of a circulation around an area of low pressure in back toward the more northeastern part of the Gulf. But northeast winds could be as high as 40 knots from off of Anchor Point down to the entrance of Cook Inlet with waves 13, 14 feet. For Kodiak Island on Monday, winds will be westerly 30 to as high as 40 knots east of the island, but they're going to turn back around to the southeast through the lower peninsula with winds picking up to 40 knots with waves 13 feet south of Sandpoint, 9 feet there north of Cold Bay. And then on Tuesday, with a bit of a low circulation circulation there over the central portion of the peninsula. We expect winds to be generally south-southwesterly on the North Pacific Gulf side, 25 to 30 knots. Waves could be as high as 24 feet south of Sandpoint. Northeast to north winds to 30 knots from ice-free areas of Bristol Bay extending out to north of Cold Bay. Across the Aleutian chain, strongest winds, well, there's going to be an area of low pressure near AKwx on Monday and just south of there, and then the strongest winds 55 to 60 knot storm force winds there northwest of AKwx and Adak, and then ahead of it, winds will be out of the east-southeast 40 knots or so there through the eastern Aleutians at Dutch Harbor. And that system quickly moves on off toward the east. It's going to bypass just south of the eastern Aleutians, but turning winds around to the north-northwest to 40 knots. Those winds will then shift back around to the east, 45 to increase to 60 knots storm force winds west of Kiska on Tuesday ahead of the next low that'll be impacting the far western Aleutians. Well, on Monday, quite a bit of ice there across the northern and eastern Bering Sea. Winds kind of a mix, 10, 15 knots. But at the ice edge, northeast winds 30 knots out of Kuskokwim Bay and as high as 45 knots in the vicinity of St. Paul, St. George, where blizzard warnings will be in effect due to those strong winds and falling snow. And then across the ice areas, winds 15 to 25 knots. The ice edge, 25 to 30 knots. So this ice could shift a little further south, especially as we go through Monday night and on Tuesday. Across the Arctic coast, winds will be out of the north-northeast 5 to 10 knots on Monday. Accelerate a bit off of Point Ley and Cape Lisburne to 25 knots from the northeast, and then a bit of a mix coming down through the Bering Strait, 10 to 15 knots. And then finally, Tuesday, winds along the Arctic coast will be out of the east-northeast at 15 to 20 knots. Generally east to northerly winds through the lower Chukchi Sea and continuing northerly through the Bering Strait to 20 knots with the ice in place there on the north side of St. Lawrence Island. So that wraps up the weather here for this Sunday across the state of Alaska. Thank you for watching, and be sure to join me again come tomorrow night.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.